So, thank you very much for this opportunity to present this. I'll have to go quite quickly because this presentation in principle was a bit longer than 15 minutes, but don't worry, I'm quite good at being quick if I need to be. First, some context, and I'm not going to spend much time on this because in this room, there's not much point in repeating a lot of this. A decade of crisis is what we've just come through. And we've seen all these phenomena that we've been talking about. The rise in Euroscepticism, the loss of trust in the system, the rise of nationalist populist politics, and even, and this, I don't think I've heard this mentioned explicitly, the disillusionment with democracy itself. And I've seen some very interesting figures on that the Pew Research Center came up with recently, particularly in, for example, in Greece and Spain, where satisfaction with the democratic process in those countries is in the 20s in terms of percentage support. So there's kind of, there's a big question mark there as well. I don't think we're at the end of democracy as such, but there is more questioning of it than there has been for a long time. All of that has produced a situation. When Mr. Juncker was elected as the lead candidate from the EPP party, he came into the Parliament on to give his first address and said this is the last chance commission. We've got to get it right this time or we're all in really serious trouble. Of course, that happened before the Brexit vote. Anyway, he said that and he was probably right about that. Which means that the Commission is doing this thing which they gloriously call in sort of this wonderful Brussels bubble speak, the road to Sibiu, as if most people probably don't know where Sibiu is. Some people do know where Sibiu is, right? I had to look it up on Google Maps. I knew it was in Romania, but I was beyond that. The Commission is putting forward a whole series of scenarios, and you may have seen this, these different scenarios for the future of Europe, going from carrying on, keeping calm, no doubt, at the same time, doing less together, same do more, radical redesign, or doing much more together. And on Valentine's Day this year, they actually published some figures that would go with each of those scenarios. And if you actually read those figures, you would realize just what a significant exercise this is. If you're talking about 150 billion for border protection, then suddenly you realize we could be taking quite a significant new direction here. Anyway, all I'm saying is this road to Sibiu, or a wider debate on the future of Europe and the choices between these things, is something which is going on in the background. It's also, of course, President Macron is trying to lead his own process on this, and there's lots of other things going on. So all of that is what's happening when we go and vote. To the road to Sibiu, actually, I mentioned the summit in Sibiu, at which the leaders of European governments decide on what kind of future Europe they want, supposedly. No, it's an informal summit. They don't decide. They kind of decide between themselves. That takes place on the 30th of March 2019, which is the day after Brexit. So therefore, there'll be quite a lot of media coverage, I think, going on generally of European affairs, and less than 2 months before the election, the European elections, of course. So let's bear all of that in mind when we go into these elections. Then, one of the things we've been doing in the Parliament, when we're looking at designing an institutional campaign, and I have to stress that this is an institutional, it's not a partisan campaign, it's about awareness of the elections and mobilization of people to participate. We looked back a little bit at what's been going on. Now, this is not an academic research. This is reading up, listening to the analysts, listening to the pundits, and trying to work out what's going on in political campaigning at the moment. And we have some interesting examples to work with. These are three. I mean, lots of other examples have been discussed around in this room in the last couple of days as well. So the environment for a campaign is tough. There's this anti-establishment mood. There's a distrust of institution, experts, traditional media, people like that, people who used to be listened to with more respect than they currently are. There's a fragmentation in the media. Everyone's talking about filter bubbles and so-called fake news. A lot of people don't like that term, but misleading information that circulates. Trolls and abuse, and this is all part of the coarsening of discourse, perhaps, in the political world. Breakdown of political loyalties, and this was mentioned earlier on, those tribal alliances to traditional political parties is eroding just about everywhere. I would suggest even in the UK, where we saw this the two parties getting a much larger share of the vote than on previous occasions, but it is not aligned in the same way as it was. And of course, the susceptibility to simple messages and a certain cynicism about the whole process. So that's kind of the background noise that's going on for anyone who is running a campaign. So we asked ourselves, okay, so what does success look like in this kind of environment? Well, we go back to Macron. One thing is to build a movement. It seems that when you don't have those traditional loyalties around parties, what you need to do is get people get people mobilized behind some sort of value, some sort of common cause. It could be En Marche, it could be taking back control, for example, in a Brexit referendum. It could be making America great again. But this is your cause, this is your movement, and it doesn't necessarily crosses over those traditional boundaries. And when emotion is more important than reason, at least in mobilizing a large-scale vote, obviously your messaging is important. And again, there, make America great again. These kind of phrases we've seen that don't actually mean very much, nonetheless, do have a great deal of purchase and help get people moving. In a world where people tend not to trust experts and institutions and pundits and the kind of people maybe they trusted in the past, who do they trust? Will they trust people who they perceive as being like them, people who are their friends or they're in touch with or something, or politicians even who manage to pitch themselves as being like them? And I would argue that in spite of the fact that he's a New York property billionaire, Donald Trump was actually quite successful in doing this as a candidate, in persuading people he was like them. So you need to build a community. So in other words, the message has to be going not necessarily through the experts and the top-down pundits or even the advertising agencies. It needs to be going through people you know or people that other people know, if you see what I mean. Your friends on Facebook, the people you meet in the street, the people who come around to your house for tea, or whatever it might be. And if you're looking for a phenomenon which I find really interesting in political campaigning, and I guess, Brian, you knew a fair bit about this, and one of your pictures reminded me of this picture. It's this marriage of high-tech, big data, and super localism. Real on the streets mobilization. So people actually getting out on this sort of face-to-face basis, but how are they mobilized? How are those people actually targeted originally? It tends to be through very sophisticated, new and highly technological tools that are being used for this purpose. And you see this in a whole series of political campaigns, and we're starting to see it indeed in the political campaigns, all the campaigns I've mentioned so far, in fact, and indeed future campaigns for the next European elections, also by the political parties. I think the 2 or 3 of the European political parties are launching such exercises already next week. So what's our strategy as a result of all of this analysis? Firstly, if we want to build a movement of some kind, if we want to mobilize people, it has to be behind some sort of digestible message that's understandable and is not a technocratic one. So we want this election to be about Europe. This is a political mandate from the European Parliament. Make it about Europe. It's not an amalgam of all the usual things, although it may, in the event, be a lot about national politics as well, of course. But we are going to be talking about this as an election for Europe. We will be looking to build some sort of community, and because the object of the exercise is to actually get people to take part and participate, we're actually doing some targeting. That's part of that's what communications is about, professional communications. You look for your targets. And targets are people that, I use the phrase here, weak abstainers. I don't mean people who are weak in themselves, but I mean people who perhaps are interested, they have a sort of positive engagement with Europe and so on, but maybe they don't vote for weak reasons, for sort of technical reasons, like it was raining, or I didn't know where the polling station was, or I forgot to register, or the dog needed walking, or whatever it might be. Those are the kind of reasons that you need to overcome. So we're going to be looking for those people. Now, those people are very often, and this is not the same everywhere, they tend to be younger people, they tend to be students, they tend to be people in sort of what you might call influential roles. So we're trying to do a lot of targeting and work out exactly who the people are and therefore what channels that are the best for talking to them. I'll come back to that. Nevertheless, of course, this is a political campaign, and here we come back to the Spitzenkandidaten. This needs to make sense, and in terms of the way that we will assist with our media strategy, this whole process, we will be working with narratives, trying to talk about what the Parliament does in terms of things that really matter to regular people. So not talking about sort of axle loads on articulated lorries, but talking about making your life safer, if you see what I mean. There's always been a rather technocratic bias in the communications of European institutions generally, and that's something that we need to sort of try and get away from. The lead candidate contest, well, we'll come back to that, but certainly we know that Eurovision, they've already come to us say they want to do this exercise again, and I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned, as Brian was saying, about how that actually works in practice and how we can make it better. And then, of course, there's the whole issue of misinformation, fake news, that we are trying to address, in particular through new tools and new structures within our organization to try and identify and prevent actually those kind of things. This will be a very decentralized campaign. There is a recognition that we've learnt over the years, it's fairly obvious, you might say, that conditions are very different depending on where you are, and that's been very clear from the discussions about the different elections across Europe over last couple of years. We need to do things, we need to tailor things for the local environment. That means the channels, it means the themes, it means what topics we emphasize, it means obviously language and culture. The last thing on the list there, the Leistungsbilanz, that's our second long German word of the campaign after Spitzenkandidaten, and that one means basically a sort of a bilan, a sort of a balance, an inventory of everything that's happened that is to do with Europe across Europe. And I mean literally on a quite a localized basis, that we are working a lot on producing information, easy to digest information about, okay, if I live in Grenoble, okay, what has happened in Grenoble because of the European Union and because of the activities of the European institutions and so on, and why that might be affected by my vote. I talked about the marriage of big data and on-the-ground mobilization. The ground game, I say this is the one thing that is very different about this campaign. It's something which is new. It is both online and offline. We are looking at this idea of digital community building. So that means, recruiting people to your cause to be partners in the communication about the election, people who are interested and want to join in and be part of it. I'll come back to this in a second. There is also a lot of events going on, very sort of micro-level events. This is Australian. That's what you're laughing. Yeah. These are Australians. I had to pick something non-European for this picture. So people wearing different coloured T-shirts. Do you know any of them? I don't know.
I know the man on the left.
You know the man on the left? Okay, well, that's one for the record, isn't it? You'll have to tell me about him afterwards. Should I be using this picture, first of all? Let's just talk about the tools and mechanisms we're going to use in all of this. We have a little mantra internally, is that we need to learn not to produce too much and pay much more attention to getting it out. It's no good. You can produce lots of wonderful videos and leaflets and brochures and God knows what, but if it just sits in a storeroom somewhere or no one sees it, there's absolutely no use to man the beast. So it's all about getting it out. And that means a lot of use of digital channels in particular, but of course media as well. Intelligence and research, so public opinion monitoring, the Eurobarometer has been mentioned here. We have a team on that, but there's lots more work going on, much more detailed work in terms of segmentation, identifying target audiences, working out what their media consumption is, so that the people we need to talk to, then we actually go about it in the right way. So if you want to talk to students, it may be a good idea to leaflet in a university campus. It may be a good idea to use Snapchat or Instagram or whatever with geolocalization. All of these kind of things we need to know, and I think we do know a lot of these things. So that is very much part of our campaign. Of course, there's the media. Media is a more traditional part of what the Parliament's communication service is doing. There are lots of media players who are interested in cooperating one way or another with the Parliament. There are even some grants available for organisations that wish to promote interest in the European election and so on. For example, in organising debates between the lead candidates or other candidates. And we have a rebuttal mechanism on the media side as well. Social media, the Parliament is actually, in its peer group, is quite strong in social media communications with large networks which can be used to build up these communities. You can do a lot of targeted communication, again, to your target audiences through that. And indeed, you can build up communities using existing social media networks. Which brings me to this, which is, you'll recognize this man. He's not involved. This is digital community mobilization. So you'll see, I use this example as one of the originals, as it were, but everyone's doing this. Very simple website, as you see. Give us your email address, give us where you live, and click to say, I'm in. That, of course, is a way that people sign up to be volunteers. And a lot of people can be mobilized in this way in quite an interesting sort of viral manner. And then we have this thing called the ladder of engagement, so that once people have signed in, you communicate with them, obviously, but then maybe they want to share with their friends, maybe they actually even want to turn out and be active on the streets of their towns and villages. That might sound far-fetched for a European election, but we get a lot of organizations approaching us saying, what can we do? Just organize us, help us organize, put us in touch with the people who are like us and share our interests. Tell us, have you got any information that we can use about what the Parliament has done or what the EU has done? And we've been very conscious over the last elections that there's been a gap between the demand that's there and what we are able to offer the people. And the gap essentially needs to be filled by the fact of knowing where people are and being able to get in touch with them. Again, this is what these digital communities are about. And if we look at how Macron used such digital communities, you'll see from this is from the En Marche website. You see at the top there, you can donate, you can join, you can participate in an event, you can join a local committee, and you can even find out what's in it for you. It's, again, same model, very simple. It's all about engaging people in a community. So the timeline, the elections are coming, just like winter. At the moment, we're working on action plans, which are action plans coming from all our offices around the EU to tell us what they want to do locally. 2018 really for us is about network building and mobilizing partners and finding these people who are going to join us. Around May the 23rd, it's going to be 1 year out from the elections that we intend to make something of a media splash around that point to remind people this thing is coming. And then in the spring, a bit after that, there will be, if we are setting up our digital community, then we need to start recruiting people, making people aware that it's there. So we will look to do a campaign, and that is where we will start to be developing actual messaging about this election, like, what it's all about, why you should be interested. That will be coming fairly soon. Then we have vote and registration deadlines in some member states, but actually relatively few, where we would need to mobilize people, for example, in France before the end of the year to make sure they register for the European elections. Otherwise, it's no good saying anything to them later than that if they're not registered. And then we have the political process, and this ties in with Brian's timeline with the State of the Union address, which is given in September, traditionally, a high media point for the European Parliament, and the whole lead candidate primary election and campaigning process. So that will be largely about media strategy, supporting the media in presenting all of that sort of political process that's going on. And then we get into what you might call the classic activation phase in the early part of 2019, running up to the actual election date itself. And that's it.
Thank you.